I still remember the moment I realized I was noticing her differently. It was one of those quiet evenings in the bookstore where I worked part-time. The smell of old paper thick in the air, the low hum of fluorescent lights above. She had walked in like she belonged in every corner of the world she didn't occupy, carrying a leather satchel and a kind of confidence I couldn't put into words. I was shelving the last row of mystery novels when she appeared in my peripheral vision, brushing past a tall stack of books as if she had no time for obstacles. Or maybe she just moved with purpose that made the world pause. "I need something unusual," she said, voice calm but with a hint of something unsaid. She glanced at me, but not fully, just enough for a flicker of connection that made me cough silently behind the counter. I offered a polite, "Any particular genre?" My voice sounded small in the quiet, and she smiled, small, knowing, like she understood I was unprepared for her presence. Her eyes lingered on mine, not long, but enough for that awkward electricity to settle into my chest. There's something about her that makes you stop thinking about what's on the shelves and start noticing the way the light hits the dust motes above her head, the way her fingers brush against the books without touching them. I didn't know her name yet, and somehow that didn't matter. As she scanned the shelves, I tried not to stare, but then I caught the way her lips pressed together when she read a title aloud. Half a smile, half a pause. It wasn't vanity. It was calculation, the kind you see in people who have lived and lost, who have made choices they're still untangling. She radiated layers, like she was a city of thoughts wrapped in a calm exterior. I walked past, pretending to check the inventory on the top shelves, when she reached for a thin, worn novel. I held it out, not thinking, just a reflex. "You might like this one," I said. She took it and glanced at me, and for a moment I thought she would say something clever or dismissive. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled that slow, quiet smile again, the one that made everything around her dim a little, and I could swear her eyes softened in a way that didn't belong to this mundane Tuesday evening. And then it happened. She dropped a casual comment about how this reminded her of something. Something I wasn't part of, and yet the way she said it, the tiny pause before she finished her thought, it felt like she was inviting me in without saying it. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat, so I just nodded, letting my heartbeat fill the silence. The air between us was brief but tangible. I watched her walk to the counter, books in hand, and she caught my gaze once more. Not fully, just the corner of her eye. And then she smiled, and I could have sworn I saw her thoughts flicker for a second. Not at me, not yet, but somewhere past me, in a place I wanted desperately to reach. I rang her up, hands slightly trembling, and she thanked me with a quiet, "See you." That felt less like an end than a beginning. She walked out, and I found myself staring after her long after she disappeared into the street. I don't know why, but all I could think about as I returned to shelving books was the way she smiled, the faint crease near her eyes when she paused over a title, the air around her that seemed charged even after she left. It was a small moment, too small to matter, but I couldn't shake it. And somehow, I knew I'd keep thinking about it. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But there she was the next afternoon, leaning over a cluttered workbench in the repair shop, where I spent most of my afternoons tinkering with old electronics. She had asked if I could help her fix an old music player, one that looked like it had been through decades of birthdays and bad luck. She handed it to me carefully, almost like it might bite, and I noticed how her fingers lingered over the edges of the device, delicate but sure. She watched me, but not fully. Her eyes darted to a loose wire or the peeling label on the table, as though she preferred the world of objects to the world of people. I found myself studying her quietly, the faint crease near her brow, the slight tremor in her hands when she adjusted the strap of her bag. I didn't think this would still work," she said finally, voice low, almost like an apology. She looked away immediately, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and I realized she hated being caught in moments like this, where she was exposed, even just a little. I took the device from her hands and began carefully disassembling it. She hovered nearby, giving me space, but every so often her gaze flicked up, as if she wanted to say something and wasn't sure how. There was a tension in her shoulders, a slight withdrawal that made me ache with curiosity. "Do you always fix things like this?" she asked, almost teasing, but there was a tremor in her voice. I shrugged, pretending it was casual, but I could feel the weight of her attention. "Sometimes," I said. "Depends on what's broken." Her laugh, when it came, was soft and uneven, like a bird startled in flight. I noticed it because it made the air between us shift, the quiet corners of the shop feeling warmer. She leaned against the counter now, just enough for me to catch the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle floral that clung to her in a way I didn't quite understand. At one point, she flinched slightly when a screw slipped from my hand, and I handed her the tiny piece instinctively. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, and she stiffened. I wanted to say something, but instead I simply handed it over and kept working, my heart thudding louder than the whir of the tools. There was a pause then, long enough that the faint ticking of an old clock seemed intrusive. She looked tired, like carrying herself through the day was a small battle, and for the first time I saw a crack in her armor. I wanted to reach out, to say something reassuring, but she caught my gaze and smiled faintly, almost apologetically, and it stopped me. When the device finally clicked back to life, she sighed, half relief, half admiration, and for a second, she let herself linger near me. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat longer than before, and I caught a flicker there, something unspoken, a hesitation, a question she didn't dare voice. She tucked the repaired player under her arm and turned to leave. Our hands brushed again, just briefly, but this time, neither of us flinched. The air between us felt charged, quiet but insistent, and I could already feel the pull of whatever she was becoming. I watched her go, and even as her footsteps faded into the corridor, I couldn't shake the moment, the way her glance lingered, how her laugh seemed to echo, the subtle weight of vulnerability she'd allowed me to glimpse. And somehow, I knew I'd keep noticing every detail. The rain had started softly, tapping against the window pane in uneven rhythms that made the room feel smaller, more intimate than it really was. I was helping her sort through boxes of old documents at the hotel's small business office, one of those tedious tasks she had claimed would take hours, but somehow the atmosphere made it feel charged. We were crouched next to a low filing cabinet, her hand brushing mine as we reached for the same folder. I froze, aware of the closeness, the way her body leaned just slightly into mine, just enough to catch a hint of her warmth. She noticed, too, and her gaze flicked up to mine, startled, but then she smiled faintly, a shadow of something unspoken passing across her eyes. "You always organize things this way?" she asked, voice quiet. Not really a question, more a distraction, maybe even an excuse to keep talking without saying what she felt. I shook my head, trying to focus on the papers. "Not really. Depends on the chaos I'm trying to manage." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the small room, and I realized I wanted to hear it over and over. My fingers lingered near hers as I handed her a folder, and for a moment, it felt like we were suspended outside of time. The rain, the boxes, the filing, everything else invisible. Then her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it, and I caught the sudden tension in her shoulders. She hesitated before picking it up. A name flashed on the screen, her ex. She frowned, thumb hovering over the call, and for a second I wondered if she would answer. Something tightened in my chest, a mixture of jealousy and restraint I wasn't ready to name. "I should," she began, but stopped herself, glancing at me with that subtle half-smile that said more than any words could. She didn't answer. She placed the phone face down and exhaled slowly, as if willing herself to let it go. We returned to sorting the papers, and I noticed how tired she looked, small lines forming around her eyes when she squinted at a folder, the slight slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. I wanted to say something comforting, something that might bridge the invisible gap between us, but I didn't. I could feel the pull of proximity, the tension in my chest demanding action, yet I held back. At one point, our knees brushed under the table. My pulse spiked, and I felt her glance toward mine again, just a fraction too long. Her breath hitched subtly, almost imperceptibly, and I knew she felt it too. Something was hovering there, right between us, unspoken but insistent. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let the barrier fall, but before I could, the door creaked open. A coworker stuck their head in, breaking the moment completely. She straightened immediately, regaining composure, and I shifted back to my own space, heart hammering with the weight of what almost was. She smiled politely at the interruption, and I forced myself to respond in kind, even as I watched her move toward the door. As the room settled into quiet again, I realized I couldn't stop replaying that fraction of a second. Our closeness, the unspoken something hovering over us, the near touch that neither of us claimed. And I knew the storm outside wasn't the only thing brewing tonight. We ended up on the rooftop of the hotel that evening, the city lights blurred through a thin veil of mist. The storm had passed, leaving a faint smell of wet asphalt and a quiet that pressed in on us. I was leaning against the railing, trying to ignore the way my fingers twitched from wanting to reach for her, wanting to close the small gap between us. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes tracing the horizon as if searching for something she didn't expect to find. The rain had dampened her hair, strands sticking loosely to her neck, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, cautious, like she was testing the air before stepping in. "Do you ever feel like you're not sure what you're doing?" I turned to her slowly, unsure what she meant, and she looked at me then. Really looked, like she was trying to see if I understood. I nodded, hesitant. "Sometimes. More than I'd like to admit." She let out a soft laugh, almost bitter. "It's not just work. Or life. It's this." Her gesture encompassed both of us, but not in a romantic way. More like a statement of confusion, of chaos. I swallowed, trying to find words that wouldn't betray the heat in my chest. This, she said again, softer, more fragile. "I mean us. Or whatever we're doing. It's not normal. And maybe it shouldn't be." There it was, the quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd been dancing around. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her it was okay, that I didn't care about normal. But she wasn't asking for comfort, just recognition. I nodded again, unable to speak without my voice cracking. We stood in silence for a long time, letting the city hum beneath us. I noticed the subtle way her hands flexed and unclenched, how her jaw tightened as if she were holding something back, how tired she looked. Not physically, but as if life itself had been wearing her down. And yet, she didn't move away from the railing, didn't retreat into herself entirely. She allowed herself to exist in that vulnerability with me, and it felt unbearable. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, and it wasn't a whisper or a joke, it was raw. "Scared that I'm feeling something I shouldn't, or that I'll ruin everything because I can't." Her words hung in the air, unfinished, but I understood. I wanted to close the distance, to tell her it was all right, but I stayed frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of honesty. I wanted to hold her, but also to disappear. The silence stretched, a living thing between us. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, a tension that wasn't lust or love yet, but something more frighteningly real. She looked at me one last time, eyes glistening faintly in the city light, and said, almost to herself, "Maybe I don't even know who I am anymore. Not like this." And then she turned away, leaving me leaning against the railing, heart hammering, and I realized I couldn't stop thinking about the sound of her voice breaking in that way, about the fragility she'd revealed, and about how I wanted, desperately, to do something, anything, but had no right. I stayed there long after she left. The city lights blurred, the air cold, and I couldn't shake it. I had just witnessed someone I cared about completely unravel, and I didn't know how to catch her. I didn't expect her to invite me into her apartment that evening. The small space smelled faintly of old books and coffee, a mix that made me feel like I had stepped into another world entirely, her world. She motioned me to sit on the couch, and I noticed how carefully she moved, as if every gesture was measured, deliberate. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked suddenly, voice quiet, almost hesitant. I looked at her, unsure what she meant. "The past," I repeated, letting the words linger. She nodded and reached for a small photo on the shelf. It was faded at the edges, a picture of her younger self with someone I didn't recognize. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it, and I realized how much it mattered to her. She began, voice catching. He was everything once. And then he wasn't. Her laugh was bitter, short, like a memory she couldn't swallow. I thought I'd moved on, that I was done feeling that kind of everything. But maybe you never really get over someone like that. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I paused, aware of the distance she still held around herself. Instead, I just nodded, letting the weight of her words sink in. Sometimes, she continued, I think about how different things could have been. About all the little moments I missed, the chances I didn't take. Her voice trailed off, eyes fixed on the photo, as if she was trying to see him there again. I felt a strange mix of longing and guilt, the kind that comes from knowing you're noticing someone else's fracture in a way that makes you ache. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to explain, that she didn't have to carry this alone, but my words felt too small, too inadequate. Then she set the photo down and glanced at me, just for a second, as if testing whether I could hold the silence with her. You remind me of him, she said softly. Almost a whisper, almost a confession. Not exactly, not really, but something in the way you notice things, in how you. She stopped herself. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to say something, but what could I say? That I wasn't him? That I couldn't be him? The truth was more complicated, more terrifying. Because I wanted to be the one she remembered differently, even if just for a second, even if I didn't deserve it. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of unsaid things, of tiny seismic shifts that make the floor beneath you feel less steady. I noticed the way her fingers traced the edge of the couch, how her lips pressed together when she tried to contain whatever she was feeling. And then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned slightly closer, just enough that the air between us vibrated. She didn't speak, didn't look at me directly, but the movement alone said everything she hadn't dared to voice. I didn't move. I just sat there, heart hammering, aware that something fundamental had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. I knew, in that quiet, fragile moment, that nothing would ever feel quite the same again. We didn't speak for a long time that evening, not because the air was empty, but because the quiet itself was enough. She sat on the arm of the couch, knees tucked slightly to her chest, and I perched on the edge opposite her, close enough to notice the faint warmth radiating off her sweater, but far enough to respect the space she still needed. Somewhere in the silence, the tension between us settled, not dissolved, not perfect, but real. I watched her hands rest loosely in her lap, fingers brushing against one another, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need words to understand her, or to have her understand me. You make things feel easier, she said finally, voice low, almost hesitant, as if testing the truth. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I only nodded, letting the acknowledgement hang between us. She looked at me then, properly this time, eyes quiet but searching. Not desperate, not demanding, just observing. And I felt something in myself shift, something I hadn't admitted even in my own head until that moment. We moved closer without discussing it. A subtle drift across the couch until our knees brushed. Not a gesture of romance, not a spark of impulsive desire, just proximity that felt inevitable. I noticed her breath hitch slightly, and I let my hand rest near hers. Slowly, almost accidentally, our fingers intertwined. She didn't pull away. There was no declaration, no flourish, no dramatic confession. Just the quiet understanding that we had crossed an invisible threshold. We didn't need to say it aloud. The small contact, the way our fingers fit together naturally, said everything we couldn't speak. We sat like that for a long time, the city outside glowing faintly through the blinds, the hum of distant traffic the only soundtrack we needed. I noticed the lines around her eyes, the softness in her expression, the way her shoulders relaxed just enough to show she trusted me. And I realized she had been holding parts of herself back all this time. Not for me, but for herself. And I wasn't going to rush her or break the delicate balance we had finally found. She leaned her forehead gently against mine, eyes closing briefly, and I felt a quiet weight lift from both of us. Not the lifting of problems, not the erasure of past mistakes, but the acknowledgement that we were here, together in this moment, and that it mattered more than any words could. And in that stillness, I understood the truth. This wasn't about love declared or promises made. It was about the slow, deliberate arrival of connection, the choice to stay, the decision to simply be present with each other. Eventually, we let go of one another's hands, but neither of us moved away. We remained in that shared space, breathing in the quiet, letting the city hum around us, and the subtle intimacy of being there, really being there, felt more profound than any grand gesture ever could. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the simplicity of it settle. This was enough. It's been months since that evening on the couch, yet I can still remember the quiet weight of her presence, the way our fingers had fit together like we'd been practicing without realizing it. Life has moved on. Jobs, errands, small daily chaos. But somehow the memory of that night keeps coming back, soft and insistent, reminding me that connection isn't always loud or dramatic. I see her differently now, not in the way of some sudden infatuation or reckless longing, but with the clarity of someone who's watched another person slowly unfold, layer by layer. I notice the little things, the way she folds her hands over a cup of coffee, the subtle exhale when a decision lands right, the glimmer in her eyes when she's proud of herself. She has taught me patience, the quiet strength of restraint, and the beauty of moments that don't demand applause. And I've changed, too. I've learned to listen more than I speak, to pay attention to the silence between words, to let small gestures carry the weight of meaning. I no longer feel the urgent need to fix everything or to chase every fleeting desire. I've learned that some things, most things, really, are earned slowly, quietly, and that the tension of waiting can be as meaningful as the resolution itself. We still see each other, of course, but the dynamic has shifted. There's an ease now that wasn't there before, a recognition that whatever we shared doesn't need labels to be profound. We understand each other in ways that surprise and humble us, in ways that make ordinary moments, pouring coffee, sorting mail, walking past a bookstore window, carry a quiet gravity. Sometimes I catch myself replaying that first day I noticed her, the way she had smiled at me over a pile of books, the spark that had made me stop in my tracks. And I realize it wasn't just the spark, it was everything after. The pauses, the near confessions, the silences, the subtle gestures that, over time, built something entirely human. Something unhurried. Something real. Love, I've learned, doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. It can arrive slowly, in brush of hands, in shared glances, in the unspoken understanding that neither of us needs to rush or explain. It is patient, messy, layered, and stubbornly persistent. I think about her often, and not with longing, exactly, but with gratitude for the moments, the lessons, the quiet collapse of barriers neither of us thought we could cross. And I hope she knows, even in the smallest way, how much those moments have shaped me. This story isn't about fairy tale endings or perfect declarations. It's about noticing, waiting, understanding, and choosing, again and again, to be present with someone, fully and honestly. And if this story made you feel something, even the smallest spark, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?